Hi there again. Welcome back to Intro to Vet Science. This is Unit 3. Now we're going to start diving into some more specialized things and get a little bit deeper than our couple of introductory sections that we've had. In Unit 3, we're going to talk about the musculoskeletal system and the nervous systems. Mini Lecture 1 here will focus on Chapter 3, which is the musculoskeletal system. So in more detail, let's describe their functions. So the five basic functions of bone are listed here. Of course, give us structure and leverage, protection obviously, serves as a mineral reserve, which I outlined at the end of my last mini lecture. And actually, bone is where blood is produced. Bone structures you see in the image here on the right. We look at cortical bone, which is the outer bone shell. Cancellous or spongy bone, which is up here near the top of the bone. And bone is comprised of a lot of different organic fibers that are all knitted together very carefully, and of course, a lot of mineral. So if we look at some detail to the bone structure, there's a lot of different types of cells within the bone itself. We have osteoblasts, which are important to increasing the diameter of the bone and healing fractures whenever those should occur. Osteocytes, which help maintain that bone matrix and that knit together feel of it. And the osteoclasts. Those are actually responsible for releasing mineral from the bone. As I mentioned at the end of my previous lecture, for example, calcium is stored highly in bone structure, and whenever the body needs excess calcium over and above what's supplied in the diet, the body can rely on bone to storehouse it and then deliver it to them. When we look at, of course, one of the things that can go wrong with bone tissue, that's, of course, the disease of osteoporosis, where the bone loses its density and becomes brittle and can break under just simple normal usage. And that's why it's important to, eat healthy, drink a lot of milk. Of course, we would have to promote that here in an agriculture course to help keep those bones good and dense and strong. So let's look more specifically at some joint types. There's an image here in the middle of your screen that shows some different types of joints, whether it's synovial joints, ball and sockets, hinge joints, fibrous joints, and so forth. There's lots of different types. Some are connected with cartilage, or nearly all of them are connected with cartilage, at some point in time. But they provide movement, and there are motion-specific type of joints. So for example, your fibrous joint that's on the top right hand, this is how your skull is knitted together. And of course, that's not meant to move very much. Whereas your ball and socket joint down here on the bottom left, there's a great deal of movement and freedom within that particular joint of a healthy animal or human. Here you see a dissected photo of a joint where you see the cartilage of the femur, so this would be a leg joint, the cruciate ligament that sits in here and kind of helps connect those two bones together, the fat pad that is then within there that helps provide a little bit of nourishment, potentially, and a little bit of cushion to that joint. We have also need to look at the axial and appendicular skeletons. So two major sections when we talk about this part. The axial skeleton, which is the skull and sternum, the vertebrae, ribs, and so forth, and the appendicular skeleton, which is the forelimbs and the thoracic limb and the pelvic limb. So kind of the upper body and lower body, so to speak. Here is again a diagram of a section of spinal column. So you see the vertebral body here, the transverse process, kind of tubules here where things may move through. Your spinal column, your central nervous system cord goes right through here in the center, and the spinous process, that pointy thing that sticks out on your back, is what that is right there. So if we look at bone growth and remodeling, so how does bone grow and how does it mend itself whenever need be? So bone grows via growth plates, and those growth plates only stay open for a certain period of time. So bone also increases in diameter, so it not only lengthens but also expands. So those are the two types of bone growth that you can have. Also, we need to talk about quickly ossification. So cartilage can be over time replaced by bone tissue. So bone completely replaces the growth plate over time. Once growth has basically ceased, then that kind of rubbery, cartilaginous growth plate tissue where bone is expanding or extending will then be replaced completely by hard bone tissue. So how does it again remodel? We can look at bones obviously with radiographs, or you would know them as X-rays. And here you've got a picture of one here on the right hand side with the humerus coming down, the ulna, and the radius. Notice that doesn't appear to be growing properly with that big hump in it. So we can have 5 stages of density, bone density. So we can have bone that has a lot of air in it, which would be young particular bone, such as in the young. Um, in the lung, sometimes that obviously has a lot of air in it. Bone can have that as well. Um, Moving all the way down to very mineralized bone tissue, such as your teeth. So how do we have the relationship between bones, muscles, and movement? Obviously, we talked about in the previous section how bone is connected to bone via ligaments and bone and tendons. Or bone connected to muscle, excuse me, via tendons, and bone connected to bone via ligaments, and how those things work together. We have extensor movement and flexor movement, and this all depends upon whether a muscle is expanding or contracting. And we always have an agonist and an antagonist muscle relationship for lots of these different types of functions. So think about when your arm lifts towards your body or moves away from your body, one muscle is acting as the agonist and one is acting as the antagonist, which is restricting its movement. What this does is help regulate the motion that that particular muscle and bone actually has so that you don't get things hyperextended and therefore injure yourself. Of course, in clinical practice, we occasionally have things that happen via injury where we have fractures and how fracture repairs, things like hip dysplasia in dogs, joint illnesses, and so forth. And here in this picture at the right, we have a dog that has had a fracture, and we've went through the tibia here and put a pin and kind of wrapped it together with a little bit of wire in order to keep it together, and then let that bone mend back together. So I'm going to stop here, let you tidy up your notes, kind of short little 8-minute video lecture, mini lecture, and get ready for the second segment. Thanks for tuning in.